Yo, people, you know what it is. It's Birds of a Feather. You know the deal. Listen, like, subscribe, follow the whole nine. We've got a show for you today. But first, you know what it is. Let's go.
Let's go! This ain't the fuck night, or this game can heat stink!
Oh shit!
It's gone!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Birds of a Feather on A2D Radio, brought to you by Manscaped. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code A2D at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code A2D at manscaped.com. It's time to throw out your old hygiene habits and upgrade your life. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and everywhere you download your podcast. So if you're listening to us right now live or on your commute, we greatly appreciate your support as always. And it's your boy Chucks here, as usual, with your boy Pete. What's going on, brother? How are you been?
Man, another day in paradise. Weather was nice. Got a little pop-up storm. I hate when it rains when the sun is out. But that's what we got. We're here. Another episode of Birds of a Feather. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days and counting from the draft.
Absolutely.
And tonight should be a good one.
It should be a good one. It absolutely is going to be a good one. We've got a special show for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got a very special guest who we will get to in a second. But we are going to talk NFL draft stuff. Like we said last week, we're going to amp up all the draft talk with it being April already. So you know what it is. Anything that you want to talk about draft-wise, you know where to go. It's Birds of a Feather. So in the first quarter, we're going to have our special guest on to talk some draft, some Eagle stuff, and everything else in between. So we'll do that. In the second quarter of the show, we are going to throw out some Eagles trade scenarios when it comes to the draft. Do you prefer to move up in the draft for a prospect? Do you want to move back? What do you think? Are the Eagles better off doing one thing or another, or staying put? Well, we'll ask you, and you give us your input on that. Second half of the show, in the third quarter, we're going to do as we've been doing the past few weeks. We're going to open it up, have some draft Q&A. Any questions you may have that pertain to the NFL draft, go ahead, fire away. We'll talk about anything. And then the last quarter, as always, we finish it off with our No Huddle segment. We'll talk about anything you guys want to talk about. Doesn't even have to be football related. I know we've got a good one coming up in a few weeks that Pete's going to be seeing. What's it called? What's the Doctor Strange movie?
Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah, there you go. He's got his tickets. So if you want to talk about more movies, anything, you know that segment is where you want to go. But like I said at the top of the show, we've got a special guest. This guy has been someone I've been following for a long time, ladies and gentlemen.
Hype him up.
2004, I read this guy's work, and I was just really inspired by everything he does in his work. He does amazing stuff. He is the creator and writer of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, which he calls RSP. He has his own website, YouTube channel. He does a lot of amazing work during the season and during draft season. And if you don't know him yet, I promise you'll want to know him more by the end of the show. So without further ado, we have with us Mr. Matt Waldman. What's going on, Matt? Thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Hey, Pete Chucks, thanks so much for having me. It's always nice to get to do a new, get to be a guest on the show for the first time. And, anyone who's, like I was telling you before the show, anyone who remembers me from way back in the day when I was writing about Brian Westbrook, man, that's all good. So I'm excited.
and so, like, I want to start off with that, actually, because you may not know, but everyone here at the station knows. Everyone that follows A2D knows. I am like one of the biggest Brian Westbrook fans there is. My son's middle name is Westbrook, so like I've been a fan of him since he was at Villanova. That only increased when he got drafted by the Eagles. But I was a young fan then. I wasn't as immersed in the game as I am now. So I was always looking for stuff about Westbrook, content, articles to help me to help my arguments whenever I get into debates with my friends about, hey, this Westbrook is the real deal. I'm telling you. And I remember scrolling through Google or whatever it was back then, and I found this article, Gut Check Volume One, Brian Westbrook, and it was this detailed article about Westbrook, how his value as a third round pick and his talent could exceed that value. And I read the whole thing. I was so enamored, and it was written by you, Mr. Matt Waldman. So if you could take us back a little bit, back to not a little bit, a lot of bit, back in 2004, like what do you remember about writing that article? Why did you decide to make it about Brian Westbrook? And knowing what you know now and what you wrote about him before, did he become everything you projected him to be?
It was the first fantasy article I ever wrote. And so it was because back then I thought this was well before the internet really started to pop off. It was about maybe 3 or 4 years before everyone was getting easy access to the internet. It was in that in between time between 96 and about
Yes.
2006,
Yeah.
so fantasy football information and even football information wasn't like it was in pockets on the internet. But I was trying to develop a mock draft site and with somebody who had some technical experience that I didn't have. And I thought, well, I'll write some content because I'd done a lot of freelance work and as a writer, and then eventually became an editor at the University of Georgia. But I thought I'd start the site. And so I started writing content for it, and I called it the Gut Check. And I had written 3 articles. I think it was on Brian Westbrook, Larry Fitzgerald, Brandon Lloyd, I think maybe Frank Gore. Those were like guys that I had pinpointed, that guys that I really
3
liked.
out of 4 wasn't bad.
Yeah, right. and if you ask me, if you want to take like a slam dunk version of like what wide receivers could have as a slam dunk invitational, which would be like the acrobatic catch, and make it a Pro Bowl event, you could call it the Brandon Lloyd Invitational and still probably get away with it. Just in the same way you could probably say J.R. Ryder, could dunk. Maybe he wasn't an unbelievable player, but so anyway, I got interested in doing more about the draft because I was listening to, not a great name in the news right now, but I was reading Gil Brandt's, mock draft and he was talking about how if Brian Westbrook were 10 pounds heavier and about 2 inches taller, he'd be a top 5 overall pick in the draft. And, someone who was an operations manager back in the day while that was going on, and this was a sideline, I was reading this during lunch and I thought, I know why that is. It has nothing to do with his height. It has nothing to do with his weight. I mean, it has nothing to do with his ability. It has to do with the resume bullet points: small school, undersized, underweight, 2 injuries. Then his story at FSU and how they rescinded their scholarship, and both injuries. One was playing on black ice, slipping on black ice, playing basketball. And so all these things that you put together, and you realize that it was the draft capital is about risk management as much, if not more, than talent. So I wanted to take the angle from talent, because all these other things, you're playing the telephone game with people, or you're asking agents, you're asking, scouts, who are all feeding misinformation at this time of year. So why not just focus on that? So I started writing about Westbrook because what I saw from him, I thought that he had that opportunity to be a special player. And while I would have liked to have seen him get the opportunity maybe to get more touches as a runner throughout his career, what can you really complain about to be a multiple Pro Bowl player who was able to do the things he did? He was in the same era as Marshall Faulk. And if you wanted to say who were the 2 best receiving backs during that era, they were 1-2. And then at the end of his career, when he ended up playing a little bit in San Francisco, you could see when they needed a guy to just carry the ball and they didn't, and they had injuries and they had to use him. You could see how savvy of an inside runner he really was, even at that late stage of his career. I mean, to me, I think he's, if someone, the Hall of Famer, maybe the Hall of Very Good, but he's more than very good. So for me, that's a fond memory, because whenever I think of Brian Westbrook, I think of that's what inspired me to do all the work I'm doing now. And it was the first piece I wrote. And when I was in a league with somebody who worked at FF Today, he said, I like how you write and talk about players. Have you ever thought about doing it? And I said, well, I actually have some pieces, because this site I'm doing isn't going to work out. The technical side isn't going to work out. Right. And I already have 3 written. And he was like, you want to start writing? I said, sure. And so I'm still writing the gut check. It's over 500 of them, I'm into, and it's, they're over at Football Guys right now. Yep. So, yeah.
So just to piggyback off of that, the attention to detail, I mean, I look behind you, the blackboard, I can't make out what it is, but it looks like there's definitely some thought that went into it. So that foundation that you had in writing that Brian Westbrook piece in the gut check, and obviously the Frank Gore, the Larry Fitzgerald, and the Brandon Lloyd, it almost seems like now out of those 4, even those 3, like you said, Brandon Lloyd, while he didn't have the accolades that the other 3 had, he was a very, very above average, almost elite contested catcher. That almost gives you the validation. It's like, okay, the proof is in the pudding at what I see. Now I'm validated. Let me continue to keep going. So I say that to say this. In this 2022 class that we're 2 weeks away from, what do you see as the strengths of this class, maybe the weaknesses of this class? And I know Chucks is ready to get into running backs with you. He's our RB guy. So I know he's going to pick your brain about the running backs that we have, but just overall as this class as a whole, where do you stack this class? I want to say against other classes, because we all know it takes about 2 to 3 years to see how many players hit that second contract. Everybody, we don't look at it like that. We look at this whole thing from a different lens of what we do here on Birds of a Feather on ATD Radio. So just looking at this class now and the potential, and I'm an insurance agent, so I know all about risk management. I deal with it all day. Yeah. Where do you see that risk management? And like I said, and if you can just kind of accentuate on where we see maybe these strengths and these and where, and then the talent just falls off a cliff at certain positions, just overall as a whole.
Yeah. So since I mainly study quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, I will say, just as someone who doesn't study the other positions, from what people I've talked to and from what I've seen a little bit, certainly tackle and guard are strong. They usually are. Safety looks pretty strong. And then in the positions that I study in a detail that's, pretty comprehensive, quarterback is boom bust and at best. And it's one of those positions where every year I would say, I always like to say, you want guys to get intermittent and starting time, which is something the NFL never does anymore. I mean, back in the, Steve McNair was the perfect example of a player who got the right kind of development, meaning you start him in, you don't start him, you put him in for some series, you take him out, and then you maybe give him a half, or maybe you give him a part of time as time goes on, and then he gets more play. But that hasn't happened since Ben Roethlisberger got into the league, and then every owner went nuts. So this is a draft where you're kind of hoping that there's a handful of players that if your team picks the right one from that handful, and they have to wait and sit for maybe a year or two, you might end up the winner than being the one that picks the guy earliest that's going to start right away. Running back to me is a deep position and underrated at near the top in terms of how they compare to some of the players we've seen in the past few years, and deeper, or as deep as the past 2 classes, probably from the second day on through undrafted free agent options. But there's less demand this year, immediate demand, than we've seen. So a lot of these guys might get lost in the shuffle. And then as you have coaching changes and they bring in their guys, they forget why the running backs from this class get drafted. And you'll hear media. I could see this class being the one where 3-4 years from now, media goes, where did this guy come from? We just wrote him off. This is a class that I think has a lot of players like that. Wide receivers very boom bust in the sense of the injuries, in the sense that people want to name, Traylon Burks the next Debo Samuel, as opposed to maybe letting him be what he is, and understanding that the next Debo Samuel is only Debo Samuel.
Yes, thank you.
And that there's lots of Debo Samuels in college football, but in the NFL, very rarely do you have Debo Samuel, because you don't have Trent Williams, Kyle Juszczyk, and George Kittle blocking and setting the edge for you the way they do. But the rest of these players, each of them, there's some guys that are not as exciting because a lot of the NFL draft media loves speed. So some of these guys who have the speed either have an injury or have certain details in their game that are just either they have lapses with them and they're inconsistent, or there's holes and that need to be filled. And then there's other guys who maybe the size and the weight overall, even in the past 3 to 4 years, you would call them too small to ride the roller coaster. And there's a trio of guys in this class who I think at least one of them, the kid out of Memphis, Calvin Austin, if he can unlock the outside part of his game the way it looked he could do in college, then he might be actually a surprise for a lot of people. But those players are going to have question marks about fit. So that's a fascinating class. And then tight end is fascinating because the NFL split. You've got the Bill Belichick method, which is forget blockers. We can get blockers later. We want guys who can catch the ball and run routes and match up. That's who we take early. And of course, if they can block too, then we'll make them the top priority. But if we have to choose one, we're going to choose the block. We're going to choose the runner. So the other teams, though, are like, well, listen, Jeremy Ruckert, he can catch, he can block, but is he going to match up against cornerbacks and quick safeties and nickels? I don't think so. So there's part of the league that's going to look at the Ruckerts and the Daniel Bellingers and say those are early round picks. But then there's guys who may have a chance of outproducing him who are later, thinking of like Cole Turner or maybe Isaiah Likely, if given some circumstances about how teams look at him. And then there's some complete guys like Trey McBride and Cade Otton, who I think belong at the top of the board, and especially McBride. And so this class is one where it's fascinating as an evaluator, as a fan. It's a little more up and down and an adventure.
I love how I thank you for giving that broad scope of the class, at least from the offensive skill position point of view. Because I've read a good amount of your RSP draft guide so far, and it is, like I said, it's so detailed, so it takes me a while to get through.
It takes everybody a while.
It takes them a while to write it, right?
But it's very, very comprehensive, and I like how you describe it is exactly how I'm seeing it. And a lot of, in terms of the running back class, because I, like Pete said, I do my work when it comes to content for A2D Radio is running back focused. A lot, I agree with what you said. This class maybe have a few guys at the top, but man, it's deep. And I keep rechecking my work, saying like I'm getting a lot of guys with like 3rd, 4th round grades. Like, am I doing something wrong? But like, no, there are a lot of guys in that middle. So when it comes to like grading running backs and looking at evaluating running backs for you personally, I know every person, every valuer, I always say, they have their priorities. They have their own way of valuing different traits more than others. Or for me, for example, I value being able to create on your own and versatility in the passing game as very important, whereas others they want to put emphasis more so on just running and vision. For you personally, what do you prioritize a lot when it comes to evaluating running backs? And another thing that I wanted you to touch on, for those who don't know, you have a really good, I guess you can say, philosophy, saying that running back, it's not instinctive. It's not an instinctive position. Can you elaborate on that? Because I believe it's a very, very good point that I think a lot of people need to be aware of when it comes to the position.
Certainly. And there are exceptions to the rule. Certainly there are people, just like there are musicians, there are comedians, there are actors that they have to put in a minimal amount of work and the results just pop off because they can assimilate information so quickly that it is almost instinctive. But there are far fewer of them than the way people talk about them, because it really, what football is about is football is a performance medium, just like if you get on a stage. And so I was a musician by trade at very early on, and I would say trade is used loosely. I played some gigs. Let's put it that way. I used to play gigs in the Miami area. I've gone back to taking up the saxophone, and I played that for about 20, 30 years. And I've just started taking the bass. So the thing that I've learned a lot from that, and then when I've talked to scouts and football people, that they kind of agree with this point of view, is that when you're on stage, then the lights come on and you're in front of people and you're giving a performance. It's different than when you're in practice. And so what happens is, no matter how you want to pretend that you didn't, you can do something, practice something a million times and it be right. And then if you haven't practiced and don't have the experience being on that stage, it's a different environment. It just feels different. The intensity ratchets up. So the deal here is that when it comes to playing in a performance, you have to fuse the technique, the concepts, the theory of football, the intellectual aspect of football into an intuitive processing speed that is at the speed of instinct or speed of intuition. And so it's like this with running back. The things I value fit into that overall philosophy. The first thing is decision making. The theory part of it is that you have to understand your blocking scheme. Gap schemes are approached differently than zone schemes. Duo schemes are approached differently than all of them. Outside running is approached differently from inside running. The way you use your feet, the speed in which you approach the hole, how you set up blocks. A lot of that's based on the leverage of defenders on blockers. Are you reading the helmets or are you reading the hips? How do you set? And then what are you looking at pre-snap? What's the side of the box? How many players on each side of the box? Who looks like they're blitzing? What is, can you recognize these types of calls? All these things, you have to understand the theory of that. But then on top of it, you also have to be able to gauge the speed of the angle and know the speed of your reaction time well enough to be able to make efficient and creative movements to create on your own or to manipulate defenders into your blockers so that you're helping your blockers do their job and therefore running to where the open space will be, not where you see it right now, but where it's going to be. And that's where a lot of evaluators, I think, trip themselves up early on, is that they look at a player who runs to open space in the college game, and because they're quick enough to get there, they like, look at that. And then in the NFL, what happens is a guy like Anthony McFarland out of Maryland will run to open space. The hole closes because he didn't understand leverage. And then the thing that fantasy players hated most in the past 3 years is watching Frank Gore join their team, because the 37-year-old would come in and on the same exact play would gain 15 yards because he understands all those things and he knows how to fuse that. So the feet are an expression of what the eye see and the brain processes. So for me, footwork then has to, all that decision making that I talked about also goes into context of like, when do I bounce a play outside based on my athletic ability? It factors in down and distance situation, field position. You know, there's some plays where you can say, I'm going to take that chance. And then there are other plays like, say, 2nd and 8, where you don't take that chance because your team's now in 3rd and 12 and you've just completely shrunk their playbook. So that's the difference between like Kenyon Drake early in his career and Frank Gore when they brought him in. You know, that's why the guy was like, he just gets yards. You know, Gase would say that. It's the same thing. So when you look at or Juwan Howard, or obviously Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard would do that, you know, and so when you look at it from that perspective, then when you look at the footwork, it's about, you want to see if they can make the dynamic lateral cuts to get out of trouble, but you also want to know if they can be efficient. Can they open their hips? Can they vary their, and just point the toe outside like Arian Foster would and just open his hips in a 90-degree angle without having to take more than one step. Right. So when the defender's literally in your lap as you take the exchange, you don't have to be Adrian Peterson and jump cut into the defender to do it, you know? Right. And so you look at these types of things, stride length, stride pace, different types of cuts, head fakes, small moves. So for me, that's important. And then contact balance, which is the pad level, and the ability to use your pad level so that you can drive through the contact. Do you accelerate into the contact? Do you know how to either hammer down or get under a defender? Do you know how to use your legs so that you are, and you keep your head up so that when your back doesn't, when you hit with your pads, that your back doesn't isn't at a curved angle so that you just go immediately down. So contact balance is important to me. And to me, I track that differently than, say, some stat services where, back in the day, they used to, if Saquon Barkley gets slapped on the thigh, and Barkley's a great player, but if he gets slapped on the thigh and gets 75 yards, that's not yards after contact. When Nick Chubb gets hit by a defensive tackle in the hips and wrapped, and he sheds that guy and carries 2 more players for 7 yards, that's more valuable than the 75-yard when you're talking about contact balance. When you're talking about overall play, different story. And then the last thing I would say, that requires short area quickness. So the short area quickness is more important to me than long speed. And so is acceleration, the first 10 yards, because we've seen it all the time. I don't care if you can run a 4.2 40. If you think slowly, you don't make the right decisions, you don't understand your blocking scheme, and on top of it, you're a slow accelerator or have slow change of direction, then the only way there's going to be 1 or 2 plays in your career where you're going to gain 50, 60, 70 yards, and that's not as valuable.
And that's because really everything works out. Everything opens up. Everything goes right. But a lot of the things that you said is, we always hear quarterbacks throw with anticipation. We're dealing with it right now. We hear Jalen Hurts throw with anticipation. I've never heard the analogy to run with anticipation. That's very keen the way you broke that down. And also, one of the biggest things, and I equate this to NASCAR and driving. When you're in NASCAR, you have to accelerate through the turns because that gets you quicker through the turns. So the way that you correlated that to contact is, okay, if I embrace this contact and I accelerate, the chances are I'm moving faster than they are. Because I know where I'm going. I can kind of see where they're going. Their hips, their head, something on their body is going to tell me which way that they're going. So I can key to try to run through that and get through that faster. So that's where I lead to, how does that equate, that philosophy, just in running backs? Do you also equate that to, say, the wide receiver position or maybe the tight end position? Or is it just a little bit? With tight ends, is a little bit more complex because, like you said, what tight end is your type of flavor? What are you looking for? And it kind of can the same thing with wide receivers. Like we've seen the Eagles right now pick 15 to pick 18 now, I believe. Where Drake London or a Jamison Williams, things that, and I'm like, I don't know if you really have to win out. When I watch Drake London, me personally, what I see, I don't see a lot of separation. I don't see how that equates to better athletes at the DB position in the league. And the quarterback, this is what is not talked about enough. And this is to echo your Debo point earlier. Me and Chuck has always talked about this. Not only is Debo with Trent Williams, Kyle Juszczyk, and George Kittle, but the system and the marriage between his skill set and Kyle Shanahan. You can be the best player in the world. You can be the top. Like, listen, we'll say it. Aiden Hutchinson goes to Jaguars. If the scheme doesn't fit, there are players that can play to a level that can just be good in any scheme. But to see that full potential and to have everything that you looked at as a college player and go to an NFL team and just embark on and hit on that, you don't see Deebo Samuels that often. That's one thing I don't think is talked about enough when we look at these top picks. And once again, I bring up the two words, risk management. What is the juice worth the squeeze at that point? Like you said with Kenyon Drake and Frank Gore. Why did Frank Gore get more snaps? Because he understood the juice worth the squeeze. It's the 2nd and 8. I can't bounce this up to the outside and put our team in a position not to come away with points. Hence why he's going to be wearing a gold coat in 5 years. You know what I mean? Single ballot. Easy. Single ballot. So I know I said a lot there, but that was just kind of just to put the cherry on top to your philosophy and how you approach it and why. Chucks and I, we look to you and we break down a lot, but we look at it and we always try to see who looks from the lens, not so much just like us, but different from the people who you see on the big 4-letter networks, who you see coming out with mock draft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.0. Why at that point, at this late? You know what I mean? Like, so when you see someone like yourself just rate the players, and then it allows us to, okay, this is these traits. We know our team, especially Howie. Howie is, I don't know anybody in any walk of life in a profession that has seen 4 regime changes and still kept his job. I don't know how he does it, but he's there. So you can kind of correlate, okay, well, the Eagles may like this player. They may like this player. This is the traits that this player, that this coach may like. I was so pleased to hear you talk about tackle and guard, because guess what? Jeff Stoutland found Jordan Mailata. I'm not worried about the Eagles drafting any offensive line position because I feel like we can develop them.
Yeah.
DBs, quarterbacks, obviously, wide receivers, maybe, and running backs, it's a little iffy. It's a little iffy.
Well, first of all, I mean, I knew if Chuck's liked my Brian Westbrook's been following me since then, he was my people, but I know you're my people. So just listening to you talk about that you appreciate that I'm not doing 8 million mock drafts because I'm not a mock draft guy, and that you appreciated the idea of, especially like some of the nuances of accelerating the contact, because you asked about wide receivers, does it impact with wide receivers and tight end? And I was going to say, listen, one of the things that I learned very early on from guys like LaShawn McCoy and Jamal Charles was that even for being guys who weren't big backs, they often initiated contact. And I think the best players initiate contact because then they can set up moves off that. Because when you hit the guy first and you're playing faster than the other guy, they have to react to what you do. So you're the one in the manipulation position. And that's exactly what you see with wide receivers, is that wide receivers are really basically telling a story to a defensive back who is saying, I don't believe this story, and you have to get them to believe it. So you need them to suspend the disbelief of where they're in a very a compressed area of space and very quickly. None of the playground like moves that you may see in Senior Bowl against two-way goes. You've got to be able to do it between the cones. So you often see players do that with quick physical movement, both upper body and lower body. Same thing with defensive backs and defensive or edge rushers. Edge rushers and wide receivers have so much in common because they have to tell the same story to offensive linemen.
Space is this big.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the hand usage and the footwork, it's very similar as if they're releasing against press. I mean, so a lot of that is getting the defender to believe that you're going inside when you're actually going outside, or to believe that you're going to break, that or get them to think that they have guessed what you're doing. Like like selling them like, yeah, you got me. I'm going on the dig when you're actually going to run the corner route. And so these types of things come down to being the aggressor. And sometimes it means with contact. Sometimes it means with pacing and acceleration. Sometimes it has to do with the quickness of the hands, or slowing down that patient but sudden quality where you go slow and then you're sudden. And so with this, when you look at this particular class, you talked about Drake London. Drake London, I know a lot of people are talking about him to the Eagles because everybody's like, they need a bigger wide receiver. And the argument, I can look at it two ways. And this is what I loved about what you said, Pete, is that you guys can look at my work and understand that what I'm doing is giving you options. I'll give fantasy advice to people too in that area, but the RSP is, the thing that has made the RSP one of the 2 most purchased independent draft guides, according to college recruiters who meet with scouts, like Alex Brown at SMU is the recruiting director, who's told me that me and Dane Brugler's the beast, and I just look at 4 positions. So, but like the reason that is that, I do the football analysis, and then you can read into that and see where you fit. And I'm so glad that you guys just get that right off the bat. Yeah. Like it's, and that it's that apparent. That means I'm doing my job. And I feel good about that, as opposed sometimes fantasy folks are like, you got this guy wrong. You're a hack and a con artist. And I'm like, okay, well, but it's like, it's not that bad. It's usually quite good, but it depends on where you venture. But I would say, when you look at a guy like London, the pros for him is that if you believe that Devonta Smith just needs somebody to take a little pressure off of him, and you can mix and match Smith, Watkins, and London inside and out, and you can use all of them in those different combinations, then you can get enough out of London, because maybe he doesn't get the vertical separation, but he gets the above the rim separation, and he understands how to make that late horizontal move to the outside enough that if you have the quarterback who's going to make the trust throws, that's the big if, and it's not because of Jalen Hurts being good or bad as much as it is that in the NFL, quarterbacks are more getting taught to make trust throws, but it's still, it still takes a good rapport for that to happen.
Yep.
And so, that's not something you want to say is you're going to bank on that guy's game for that. But he has enough quickness to do the job as a contributor on the outside, just not your primary outside guy. But therefore the con of that is if you're trying to move Devonta Smith inside more often, then you probably want a guy who's going to occupy that top corner and force them to keep that top corner outside rather than moving and following Devonta Smith around. So that's where maybe Jameson Williams in a year could be that guy for you. But you might be taking a redshirt year before you can realize that.
Yeah, great. I mean, great points. And both of you had said, the whole idea, and I'm going to ask you this later on, Matt, is the whole idea of doing rankings is so flawed because of you have different situations where these prospects, it's not just a linear generalized thing when it comes to teams. They have to go to certain situations where they're going to be used in certain ways. So if you were to have in some type of fantasy draft, among the NFL teams, the Tennessee Titans aren't going to pick, your perimeter dual threat kind of running back because they don't have that kind of scheme. They're not looking for an outside zone runner. Whereas you have your Kyle Shanahan's, they're not going to pick a Derrick Henry because he's not that outside zone runner who is going to make that one cut and up. So it is very applicable to so many different things, wide receiver, even quarterback. We touched on, now I kind of touched on two prior Eagles running backs. We talked about Brian Westbrook at the top of the show. And we talked about, you touched on LaShawn McCoy. I want to ask you about the current Eagles running back, Miles Sanders. And if I remember your RSP from a few years ago, overall you had said he has stuff to work on with his vision, decision making, but overall he does have pretty much high upside. How have you watched him in his 3 years so far? And if so, where have you seen his progression go from being a rookie to now? Where has he developed? Where hasn't he developed? And do you think there's still room to grow there? Because the leash is now short. One thing that we can't argue about is his durability. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. So the leash is really short. This is his last chance to maybe earn that extension. So is there room to grow? In your eyes, do you still think he can reach that upside this year if he stays on the field? Or do you think there are still really glaring holes when it comes to his inefficient footwork and his tendency to bounce outside? Because for me, I've seen progress when it comes to his discipline. A lot of people will argue against me, and I tell them I've studied every single one of his carries. He's improved. Has it gotten to a point where it's high end? No, I don't think so. But I've seen the progression. So would you agree with that? Have you seen that improvement in him? Or do you think he is pretty much what he is at this point?
Yeah, I've absolutely watched Miles Sanders. I mean, one of the reasons, the way that I study college players is I study the NFL every week, and I probably watch between 8 to 12 games between Sunday and Monday to write a column, and I do video breakdowns throughout the day and night. And that's my way of looking at where these players are and what they're doing, and then also informing how I create the criteria I use to grade the RSP. I mean, because the whole process is about continuous improvement and trying to be more granular with how I look at things. That's why it's so big, because I take people through my process. I bookmark it so you don't have to go through all the process stuff if you don't want to, but I define everything in a glossary. I give weights and I explain what the weights are. I show you the two grading systems and all that. So when I look at, when I'm looking at NFL players, I'm using it to go, oh, maybe that does work here. or this is something I had, early on in my career doing this. Maybe this is something I hadn't seen. I need to go check out some coaching books. I need to talk to somebody who I have a contact with to get me hooked up with somebody who can give me this information. So when I looked at Miles Sanders, like you said, he had a tendency to really not understand zone blocking at the level that he should at Penn State. Yeah, he ran some there, but Tevin Coleman ran it at Indiana. He ran outside zone. He went to the Atlanta Falcons and immediately showed that he couldn't run outside zone at the pro level, because everything was, when he played Ohio State back in Indiana, I think he had 178 yards, but like that, most of that came on like 3 or 4 carries, and the rest were like just bad decisions. And the others were that he out-athleted people. You can't out-athlete people as much in the NFL. And that's what happened with Sanders, is that, he would try and out-athlete people to bounce things outside and get away. He couldn't get away with it. And he was impatient at times and didn't really understand how to press as deeply or to set up, forays, to the inside with more efficient footwork. I think he's gotten better too. I would agree with you 100% that he has become more patient. He has done a better job of not just reflexively bouncing things. I mean, he's still going to try sometimes, and sometimes he's failed, but every back does. There are very few players who are that conceptually tight in terms of that decision making all the time. But I thought all of that was fine. The issue is that you look at if you're not available, that's a big part of how NFL teams look at things, and they can get impatient quickly, especially with a running back position that's not paid as much anymore, that's more expendable, and the talent still keeps flowing in.
Yes. So I have a question for you, and it's a overrated, perfectly rated, and underrated. If you could indulge us in the wide receivers, overrated, perfectly rated, underrated, and also running backs as well. I'm not even going to throw names out there. I'm just going to let you just completely shoot from the hip.
Okay, so overrated. I would say Treylon Burks is overrated right now. He's going to need the perfect fit. He's going to need the perfect fit to be anything like the next Deebo Samuel.
Okay.
He has all the tools to become. Now, when I say overrated, I think he can contribute, but in the way that Kenny Golladay contributed in Detroit when he had excellent receivers on either side of him, Golden Tate and Marvin Jones, and he can match up against nickel corners and safeties. And then then he's great. But if you put him on a team where he has to be the primary on the outside with a so-so or bad quarterback, I think you're going to see that he doesn't have a blueprint for how to win against press coverage, and that's going to be a little bit of difficulty among some other things that are there. Underrated, I think Chris Olave is underrated just from the standpoint that I think he's a slightly better prospect than Garrett Wilson. I think he all around, he's a smoother route runner. Wilson's very good, but Wilson can have patient and physical corners stifle him, whereas Chris Olave is a little bit more efficient with everything he does. I think he's a better tracker of the football. He doesn't make as many of the flashy plays as Garrett Wilson does, but at the same time, his hands techniques are better. He actually comes up with his hands together like this when he extends, or with his pinkies together, and therefore he's not clapping onto the ball like Garrett Wilson often does. And while Garrett Wilson makes some of these catches, it almost looks like he's like, I got the math problem right when I did it. And, that's great. But when maybe a stunned Michigan corner is looking at him and go, dude, yeah, you did get it. Whereas even a New York Giants corner will probably slap the ball away and go, no, you didn't. And so Wilson has a little bit more to go. He's still good, but I think Olave is underrated from that respect. I think George Pickens is a little overrated. I like, again, in the same vein as Burks. If he makes these incredible athletic catches, very acrobatic plays, great hand-eye coordination, some of the best highlight reel catches you'll see. You also realize that he gets himself into positions that he shouldn't get into, to where he wouldn't have needed to make these types of plays that are going to be more difficult in the NFL, because he doesn't jump early enough to track the ball in some of those contested catch scenarios. Again, still think he can contribute. Don't think he's
I think he's got a ways to go before he's a number one, wide receiver. He can get there, but I'm not quite there. I think Alec Pierce is underrated. I think his ability to go up and win the ball, the great positioning there is fantastic. If you look at his metrics and his size, there's not much difference between him and Justin Jefferson, another guy I liked a lot. And, if anything, he jumps 3.5 inches higher. And he can take the contact. He's not as good of a route runner as Jefferson. I mean, we got to be real about that. But he's a good blocker. And he's going to be an asset on that end of the spectrum. I think Khalil Shakir is an underrated player out of Boise State. He's got that Deontay Johnson type of skill to get downhill very quickly. I call him a Steelers wide receiver because if you think of Emmanuel Sanders, Hines Ward, Juju Smith-Schuster, and even Deontay Johnson, they get downhill quick. They play physical for their size. He makes very good contested plays. He has an issue clapping on the ball a little bit like Garrett Wilson, but fine. So those are some underrated guys, overrated guys. In terms of running backs, I think Brian Robinson is underrated just because
Tennessee Titans written all over him.
Brian Robinson is the type of guy that he is. He is a Tennessee Titans runner that says all over him. He understands who he is. He's big. He's going to run through you. But he has the footwork to be efficient, and he's quick. And he's gotten quicker and a little bit more sudden with his acceleration. Soft hands. Very good pass protector at this stage of his career. He earns good position. He can use his hands well. He doesn't drop his head as much as a lot of young guys do, so he can stay balanced. And he has legitimate closeout power. Like, he's not Larry Johnson, but I think in style, there's some things to say about Larry Johnson with the Chiefs way back when that Brian Robinson has a little bit of that. I think Kennedy Brooks and Kiante Ingram are underrated as well. Kennedy Brooks.
Vision
for days. He might have the best vision in this class. He might have the best vision in a lot of classes. It's just the question mark with him is while his athletic ability isn't bad, it's not what owners and GMs and some coaches will value. I had Trey Sermon as my number one back last year for a lot of the reasons of vision and things like that. And I wrote pre-draft that San Francisco was the absolute worst case scenario for him in my RSP. And then I hoped that because they traded up, maybe they had changed their tune about how they were going to approach things. And it turned out that they'd rather have the guy who was super fast and not as nuanced.
I don't know why they took him. I'm perplexed.
That was interesting for me. And Kennedy Brooks is a lot like that with Trey Sermon in the standpoint that he has good contact balance. He has really good skill to just make the smallest move to avoid a direct shot or angle. And then he has underrated contact balance to work off of it. And he's fast enough. He's quick enough. He has enough acceleration. And that he's held off some pretty darn good backs to come through, or at least worked his way into rotations while they were there at Oklahoma. Kiante Ingram, he got bumped by Bijan Robinson, the stud out of Texas, who's 5-star option who just played great in his freshman year. Ingram was I believe a 4 or 5-star back himself, which basically means that you grew into your man body early, into the college game and showed some athletic ability they hope you can build on. Because you look at Saquon Barkley, he didn't have his man body when he came to Penn State, not remotely, and he was a major transformation. It was like Venom took his body over, So, Ingram though, he has a little bit of like that Chris Ivory kind of, Marshawn Lynch starter kit in terms of maybe not super fast, but fast enough, very quick acceleration, solves problems very easily, even in difficult situations, has that blend of dynamic and efficient footwork, catches the ball well, and he can run zone or gap scheme. So he's just like Brooks. He's fluid in that respect. The issue with Ingram is that, you're going to look at him, and I think teams are going to look at the switch and the transfer, and he's going to have a low draft capital. And I think at best, he could maybe become an aspiring Kareem Hunt type of player, maybe not at that level, but I think he could start eventually. I think he's that good. He's got that ability. But at worst, I think he's a Chris Ivory, who Chris Ivory started and just couldn't stay healthy. Yeah. So those are underrated guys that I can name a lot of underrated guys, but let's go with some overrateds. Overrated. I think Rachaad White's overrated. I think it can eventually. I think he's kind of like a Kalen Ballage or a Tevin Coleman or a Darren McFadden in the sense that if you get him in the right system and you let him make one decision downhill and your team has great blocking, his size and speed will be enough to be a productive player. But if you're asking him to be the lead back in a diverse offense where there's a lot of versatile blocking schemes, and you're asking him to create or to actually just do some basic things like, hey, listen, here's the crease. It's open. You've set up the open crease. It's there, and it's open when I say there's a linebacker or a safety unblocked at the end of that crease, but he's on his heels. He's not running downhill. Yeah. Running back should see that and salivate, either because they're going to initiate contact and get yards through after contact at that, or they're going to make the guy miss and set him up. And instead, I see Rachaad White try and bounce away from those situations after he's entered those creases way too many times. He's got great hands. He has great hand-eye coordination. Kalen Ballage did too. Kenyon Drake did too. So to me, White's a little bit more of a project than he is a finished product. I think I never was big on Kyren Williams. His quick. He's got enough quickness. His speed and acceleration are just not there. And that was something you could see just even though the North Carolina run where he reversed field for 97 yards is pretty. If you analyze that run, you realize a confluence of factors happen that don't normally happen. And so he also runs to open space rather than running to leverage. And so that's one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about with him. And if I were to give a last overrated guy, I just don't get Tyler Algier. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about him. He's a guy you want to root for because he certainly, walk on, played a little linebacker. He's got the size you're looking for. But I didn't think he had a good feel for gauging angles of pursuit, either as a runner with defenders heading towards him or as a pass protector when he had to be on time to get to his spot, that he just didn't gauge the pursuit angles well enough there. So I see him as more of a special teams guy than a top guy. I know that there are some folks, I think Dane has him really high on his board.
I think he had like 4, if I'm not mistaken.
4 or 5.
Yeah, he has him 4 or 5. I have him 28th, which is, so the zone scheme's good, but I just thought his pass protection, his athletic skills kind of contributor level for me from what I've seen more than it is starter level. And I just wasn't high on him. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. We'll see how it goes.
I know for Algier, his advanced stats say that he was one of the leaders the past 2 years at breaking tackles, shedding tackles on contact. Where do you see his contact balance? Is it high end to where he can right away contribute as someone who can kind of create and use that as his way to win right away as he learns to develop the other parts of his game? Or do you think that contact balance is similar to what you said about Saquon Barkley? Do you think his contact balance is a little bit overrated to where that skews the stats?
It's a great question. Now, I will say that I think Saquon Barkley has good contact balance. It just wasn't as good as Nick Chubb's, and there's probably I don't know if there's another back other than maybe Zeke and maybe Alvin Kamara, who's more like a ninja or a Zen master in terms of how he handles contact. But when I look at Tyler Algier, I thought he had high-end starter contact balance against indirect forms of contact coming from angles, which is good. So that was good, and so he of the 5, looking at that was good. Then I had him as a upper end committee level back, just under starter for direct contact balance. So when you ask him to drop his pads directly into a hit, he could defeat some linebackers, and occasionally maybe stalemate a defensive tackle or a defensive lineman, but he wasn't going to win a lot of those. And
Gotcha.
that's just the difference between a good and a great back.
Yes.
So I think starter caliber is there. For me, it's more about the decision and processing. If he doesn't take the good angles, if his angles aren't good enough there, that's where he may fall into where I see him. If he actually does, then he's fine. And then I track like every tackle attempt that I see from a running back in the games that I track. I watch more than what I track, but I try to watch at least 4 to 6 games of every player. And when I look at, I classify tackles into reaches, wraps, and hits. And obviously you can tell which ones are the easiest and to the hardest. And then I look at whether they broke them and what their percentage was. And Algier, when I looked at him, against reaches, he certainly did well against defensive linemen. He was 5 of 5, which wasn't bad. He was, that he was tied with Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight, for that, which isn't bad at all. But then I didn't see him anywhere against defensive, against, let's see, that. But he only had fewer than 6 attempts. When you look at guys like, there are some other guys in this class who had, more than 10 or 6 to 9 attempts and had high levels. But then when you start getting into like wraps and hits, then looking at wraps and hits, I really didn't see him really show up strongly there. The guys that showed up strong in that area were guys like Tavon Thomas, Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Spiller, Breece Hall, Kevin Harris, Zaquandre White, Bam Knight. Algier did well against defensive. I wouldn't even say he did well. He showed up at the higher end against defensive linemen, but nobody breaks wraps of defensive linemen very often. He had one, which automatically put him in the leadership out of 12. But then against hits, the same thing. Looking at hits, Algier was good against linebackers. He bounced off 79% of the hits I saw against linebackers. So that was strong. And that put him as one of the leaders there. He didn't really have much against defensive linemen, but if you can get him to the second level, that's where he's going to do his job. It's just a matter of, will he get there?
Get to the second level. Now, another guy that you talk about overrated, and a lot of people are going to be upset with me saying this. One of the guys that I think has started to be a little overrated, because I constantly see him in top 5 rankings, is James Cook. I think that his last name is giving him more hype than is warranted. I think he's a different type of player and running back than his brother, and I think he needs that certain type of situation where he is that space player that's going to threaten in different ways. He's never going to be your lead back. So, what do you think of James Cook? Like, do you think that he's in an era? And the way I did my projection on him was that in today's NFL, where there are a lot of now hybrid type of players. I mean, we said Debo, but Cordero Patterson is also someone who's been doing it for a while. We're seeing a lot of like the delineation between running back and wide receiver and getting these guys into space. What is your take and projection on James Cook? Do you think he's being a little bit overhyped too? And do you think there is definitely a path for him to become and develop into a larger role, or is his size always going to be a concern for you?
I would classify him as an intriguing and difficult evaluation from the standpoint is that, and before I do that, I'll just say this. It's funny. It could play out like this, that people tend to overreact. They tend to react one way with somebody and then overreact in the opposite when it works out or doesn't work out. So, for instance, I remember Dalvin Cook and there were a lot of people who said, well, he doesn't jump high. He didn't have these great metrics. Even in high school when he came up, he didn't do all this well. But they didn't understand how that the metrics are supposed to show you whether or not what he does stylistically needs to match what the style of the player is.
And Dalvin Cook has that curvy linear movement to bend angles around people at high speed as opposed to hard cuts. And he's an exception to the rule in that regard. So of course he's not going to, the high jumping doesn't really apply. And some of those other things didn't. Now that people missed on Dalvin, I think maybe they want to look at James. Also, in the same way that people missed on Patrick Mahomes, they wanted to look at Drew Lock. They wanted to look at Jordan Love and say the next Patrick Mahomes. Or they look at, they may look at Malik Willis and say, well, the path worked for Josh Allen if we put him in an offense like that, because they missed on Allen and they missed on Lamar Jackson. So you have those types of scenarios. And I think with Cook, though, what makes him fascinating is that he has excellent feet, and he really does see the field well and makes great decisions. He has no problem finding those tight spaces and exploiting them. So, and he can solve a lot of problems that maybe his offensive line couldn't solve for him early, and he can do that early and then get into the crease. So there's a chance there that he can make some plays for you in that realm. But are you going to lean on him to be your every down back? In order for that to happen, you have to have some physical play that's a little bit beyond what your size may indicate. And I just don't see Chris Johnson as his comparison point. I have Chris Johnson on his spectrum because I have to do comparisons. So he's at the top end. Let's just say that Chris Johnson's in the elite, wealthy, gated neighborhood, and then Eric Metcalf is probably in the upper middle class neighborhood where everybody funds the public school, and it's all of that. And then you've got Cook and Nyheim Hines, and they're in kind of more the working class neighborhood, where it's you can get a nice house, the police come when you call them, and it'll take forever to get there, and they actually care about you, and they don't profile you, and it's all those types of things. I think James Cook is in that neighborhood where he can be as good as Nyheim Hines, maybe a little bit better than that, and used a little bit more in the way that people hope Hines would be. But seeing him as Chris Johnson, I can see why people say it, but I'm too skeptical to acknowledge that. Yeah.
So I'll leave you with this. So me and Chuck's both went to Rutgers. And there's Isaiah Pacheco. Where is he UDFA? Third day? Do you see what his traits in general compared to someone of that you may have a 5th, 6th, or 7th round grade on?
Well, this is fun because I didn't know you guys went to Rutgers. Yeah. And I've been talking about Isaiah Pacheco on a lot of podcasts as an underrated.
He's actually my cousin. I didn't want to throw that out there. He's fun.
Well, you're going to be pleased, which is funny. This is all kind of funny here, how this goes. Because I've mentioned him so much. I just like to try and mention different folks for folks who listen to my podcast at this time of year. Isaiah Pacheco is one of my sleepers. And he's a guy that I've rated 9th on my board overall. And I think that I love that he's sturdy. He's explosive. When people talk about his decision-making flaws, that's what I've heard. When I watched his tape, I think they conflated that with the subpar offensive line. And they go, because a lot of people don't
like Cam Akers.
Yeah.
Like Cam Akers. Yep.
Exactly. And that is exactly who I compared him to, is Cam Akers. Because I have Kylan Hill on the bottom end. If, for some reason, Isaiah Pacheco just doesn't process fast enough in the NFL, acclimating early, maybe he's more Kylan Hill, which isn't bad. Kylan Hill looked pretty darn good for the Packers before he got hurt.
Yeah.
And then Akers is the high end. He has great hands. I think he has some of the best hand-eye coordination of the as a pass catcher, even though he wasn't used, extensively as maybe some other guys. But the thing is that when you scout players, I think my philosophy is that you want to study players and look at things that allow you to understand what they do physically, conceptually, technically, and intuitively to put themselves or their teammates in position for positive plays. Not make positive plays, but get in the position to do so, because it's a team sport. So if you do your part and your other people don't, but you did your part, then you get a high grade, like a Matt Forte used to be for me when he was at Tulane, playing LSU's of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there were a lot of plays where I watched Isaiah Pacheco have to take carries and get gains where he probably could have looked at his watch and going, I'm either going to get planted on my behind because my guard can't get around the center, or I've got to do something to get something here, or I'm going to be caught in the backfield.
Yep.
So I thought his decision making was better than advertised. And I have a grade for him right now that's basically in the same range as Kevin Harris and Jerome Ford, and not that far away. Really, like if he had done one thing better, he could have been, 6th or 7th on my board easily. And Khalil Hilbert was on my board as my number 9 back in the sleeper last year. That he's got a contributor, a rotational starter grade right now. I mean, if they need to put him in and let him roll, I think he can. And they may need some specialists to help out as he acclimates to pass pro, to certain route running and adjustments, things like that. But no, man, he can. I love him. He's a guy I plan on in fantasy leagues picking up where I can get him at value. I like him a
lot. Same here. Now, when I studied Pacheco, I wanted to pick your mind about this. I noticed that he does, more so than any other running back that I've watched so far in this class, he does have very short, choppy strides with his knees come up a little high. I don't know if you saw similar and what you make of that, because I saw when the last time I saw a running back that had that really caught my eye in terms of short choppy strides was Elijah Holyfield. And obviously that didn't work out for Elijah, but I never know what to make of that. When you have that type of footwork, does that, from your experience, does that help a running back more, or is that just something where it's his style?
It can be stylistic, but you want backs who run with high knees, because if you go watch Alvin Kamara and watch him in contact, and his knees get very high, his toe points down, the heel goes up, and then as he pulls out of whatever wrap that he pulled through doing that, he then kicks his heel up towards his behind parts, and that prevents the defender from being able to wrap him from behind on a second chance opportunity when he's on the ground. Marshawn Lynch had choppy steps. And you also have to remember, one of the reasons Isaiah Pacheco probably is running with choppy steps more often than what you might notice it more often is the line. Exactly. He knows he's going to have to, he's a little more wary about when he can really open it up and accelerate. Now, here's the difference. Holyfield also was a guy who just had burst, but he really didn't have much else. He didn't have that top end speed. And once that burst was only so good, for him. So, Pacheco is a completely different type of vehicle. If you're gonna make that comparison, there's an engine under that hood.
Yes,
4.37. True. I literally just saw him run a 40 2 days ago.
Yeah,
down home kid, man. I'm so happy for him and the family. We'll see where he's at. Matt, this has been great. It's been an hour in. We thought we were going to have you at half an hour. I just think that, and so much. We thank you so much for coming on with this. Absolutely. I'm not even sure if you want to stay on, you can by all means. I don't have any more questions for you. You can just take this.
I know there's one question that probably a lot of the fam listening, a lot of them obviously with us being Eagles centered show, they're wondering, because on the opposite side of the ball, a lot of them want a wide receiver. So in your opinion, Matt, at 15 or 18 or even with their second round pick, if you were to pick one of the wide receiver prospects in that range from round 1 to 2, maybe even a high end the third round, if there's one or two prospects that jump out to you that would be a perfect fit for what the Eagles do, put your GM cap on. Who are you looking at the most?
Well, if I was going to say, listen, if I looked at my room and said we believe in Jalen Hurts, we believe in the offensive line well enough that where we're at we can keep trying to pick later here, but we need a wide receiver and we need someone to really tie this room together. Um, the size isn't quite there on this level, but I would consider Chris Olave just because he can be that mix and match guy. He's he to me. Listen, are you going to be upset with having Robert Woods? Or I mean, to me, that's his downside. His upside is he could be Chad Ochocinco, in terms of the route running, in terms of the smoothness, and Olave played. I believe that Ochocinco played with TJ Houshmandzadeh at Oregon State together, and I think it was Houshmandzadeh that was the higher pick, if I remember. Maybe not. He was. Okay, so you think about it from that perspective. I'm a big Olave fan. I think he's not as high as I rated. My highest ever pick at this point now has been Jamar Chase, or highest graded guy was Jamar Chase. Jalen Waddle behind that. Olave is not in that tier, but he's knocking up on the ceiling with his forehead. So, I like him. Alec Pierce, we talked about another one. I think he would be a very good fit for what you're trying to do if you're looking for that outside guy, and then you can move him inside to help block, and he'll help you there. Yeah. So that's good. Christian Watson, maybe if you can get him later on, later first round or early second round. I don't think it's going to happen because there's a lot of hype on him. But I think at 6'4", 208, he's probably going to wind up 6'4", 220 at some point in his career. And he played in the West Coast offense already. So the foundation is there. I like the hands. He's very good after the catch as a runner. The route running, there's just lapses or small things that I think he has a very high ceiling, and the floor is high enough that I don't think he'll disappoint. Then maybe, later on, if we were to look later on as some options, I'm going to take the chance on this guy. And I think I've just always liked Justin Ross. And I know that ESPN just came out with this. They did a surgery that's football players never come back from, with the spinal surgery, the fusion surgery for the congenital issue that he had, and then he broke his foot in the first game last year, and he played through a Jones fracture all year. Well, when you play through a Jones fracture all year, and then you get surgery in late November, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks of being immobilized essentially before you can even start running routes, much less just jogging, much less running routes and pounding on that foot. And now you have only 6 weeks to get ready to game the system to run your fastest combine times, and he ran a 4.56. To me, I talked to some guys who have the biomechanics expertise, who've worked in the NFL, the analytics expertise, the scouting expertise. And I've said, am I crazy to think that someone's going to get Justin Ross and by August they go, he's far more explosive than we thought he was, and we think we got a steal. And I think that if you believe that what the doctors are saying, and it's not pre-draft hype just for him to get his contract, and you believe that this is a guy who, and you should believe it, he played all season at Clemson, and on a damaged foot on that, which would make him more prone to probably getting hurt because he's not at full capacity, in terms of taking the wrong hit. If they say he has no more of a chance of suffering a huge lapse or a huge injury that's catastrophic to his well-being than any other football player, then you take this guy in the 4th round or the late 3rd round, and he's great at physical play. He's the antithesis of what people were concerned about with Devonta Smith. He may not be speedy like Smith, but he's fast enough. He's like Hakeem Nicks at worst. Yeah. You can get Hakeem Nicks and put him opposite with that, and then you can put him inside too, and he has no problem catching the ball, no problem dealing with hand fighting, no problem with any of that, taking hits. Justin Ross all day.
Yeah. Nice. I like it. Well, that's all I had. So I wanted to we had some we do have a live chat going on during the show, and we had some questions if you don't mind answering them. So one of our A2D colleagues, Frank Vespi, he says he's not fully convinced with this year's quarterback class. Are there any under the radar quarterback prospects that may shock you? And I think reading the RSP, I think you have a perfect one. I think I know you're going to say, but obviously I'm going to let you answer it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's convinced, to be honest, Frank. I've talked to guys like Russ Landy, who is a co-host of some shows I do, who's the head of U.S. scouting for the Montreal Alouettes, and used to be an NFL scout for a couple teams, and different scouts that I've also talked to that I can't name publicly. But everyone seems to have a different favorite, and everyone has a different guy that they don't like. And for me, while I think Carson Strong is the most bankable name that people know of, who could surprise, because I thought he looked better on one foot than on one leg than a lot of the guys who we're talking about right now, who just may need a redshirt year. The guy no one's talking about, Frank, that I graded very high, and that's why I do a pre-draft and post-draft, because the guy who's my top quarterback this year is Skylar Thompson out of Kansas State. Skylar Thompson he lit up the Manning camp too, which is interesting in that respect. But he has a good but not great arm, good enough to be a starter in the league. Certainly can make all the throws you're looking for. His advanced metrics are actually a lot better than people realize. He has great pocket presence. I mean, efficient movement to be able to avoid pressure. So, like people say, well, LSU didn't have all their top players. Well, go watch the LSU game and see what he could do within his control. And he dismantled that team with throws that, Justin Herbert would make. And you would put the pen down and go, what's wrong with that? And then if you want to go back further, you can watch him against Texas, a loaded Texas team that took Joe Burrow's LSU team to the brink during Joe Burrow's national championship run. And if Texas won that game, we might have been talking about the Longhorns because of how well they played and the athletes they had. And he threw the winning touchdown in that game, layering it between two defenders, and the receiver hit the ground and let the ball pop out. And he can move. There's like a little Tony Romo in terms of the ability to move, but he also has the layered throws like a Justin Herbert, and to be able to make those plays in the middle of the field. He's tough as nails. He's physical, and he's accurate. He's a good decision maker. He plays in a West Coast offense. He plays in the same offense that Wentz and Trey Lance went in. The difference with Wentz, as you guys well knew, is that while he understood the West Coast conferences concepts, his footwork was so jacked up that they had to go to a pistol because they knew that he wasn't going to be able to throw an accurate ball off of 5-step drops or 7-step drops. Yeah. So, but this guy has no problem with the drops, and he's smooth and accurate in that regard. So I'm a fan. Now, realistically, he might not even be a 5th-round pick because teams have to support their scouting reports with production. And he was in a run first, look short, then go deep offense, which so he didn't get to dominate a lower division with great stats like Trey Lance did. And I loved Lance, but that's kind of the story on him, and I think he's a good surprise.
You got another question from Matthew Walsh. He asked any Division II players that we should keep our eyes on.
That's a good question from what I'm looking at here. Maybe at running back, there's some guys that are interesting to consider. Certainly, Pierre. I think Pierre Strong, is he Division II or FCS? I think it's
I don't know.
I think he's FCS, but Pierre Strong's a smaller school guy.
Yeah.
Certainly worthwhile looking at. He reminds me of Raheem Mostert in terms of skill sets.
Oh, okay. So, I can see that. Yeah.
So, and I think that he can appeal to a wide zone team. Like if you're looking for that next Elijah Mitchell, I think he's a better version of that.
Okay.
So I think that's a player that's worth considering. Maybe a couple other guys that might be fascinating from respect. Jermaine Martin is a guy who I think has really nice movement skills. I think he's fascinating. Julius Chestnut, I didn't feel like I got as complete of an evaluation as I would have liked of him. But he has potential as an inside runner. I just have questions about his cutback ability. So those are a few guys that might be worthwhile to consider if they get into a camp.
Gotcha. Now, I did think of one other question I wanted to ask you before we have you hop off. I know your running back rankings. I've seen them. I differ just a little bit at the top of my personal. I do have Kenneth Walker at 1, Brees Hall at 2, but I do have them in the same tier. So I've been saying that like you can toss them up between the two. I really wouldn't care. To me, they're both tier 1 running backs. They are round 1 grades, whatever you want to call it. They're studs. What are in your eyes? Because I've said it before on the show. People get tired of me saying on the show. But in your eyes, what are the differences between the two? What does one do well while the other does better, and vice versa? And then what do you think the ceiling is for both of them? And do you think that they are both like scheme transcendent in terms of it doesn't matter where they go, they will both end up being high-end players at the next level?
Yeah, I think they're both going to be scheme transcendent high-end players at the next level who can be lead backs, if not featured starters. I think that Brees Hall has a little bit more power, if you define power as dragging defenders and getting yards where they're already wrapped up and pushing people backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not collisions necessarily, but being able to be able to pull defenders and break through tackles, wrap ups and things like that. I think Hall is on the borderline of being star caliber at that. Whereas I think Walker is merely a starter caliber, which is still more than good. Yeah. Direct balance, I would actually say in that case, with Walker, I would say that they're both probably about similar. The place where it starts to stand out is Walker is a better has his ball security. They're both in the high end, and I would say they're actually they're actually even in terms of their rate, 1 out of every 245. Speed, acceleration. Hall has a little better acceleration. I'd say he has that ability that when you have a linebacker or safety in the hole and they have the angle on him and he's at a stop, he can restart and win against that good angle. Whereas Walker is sudden himself, but just not quite that special in terms of that ability to accelerate. But Walker has better vision. I think that I think Hall needs to improve with certain types of blocking schemes, whereas I think Walker can do everything you want from him.
Yeah.
And he's more patient, he's more nuanced, whereas with Hall sometimes takes some risks that he shouldn't take. There are times where I think that he's testing things out with his athletic ability more than he should, but I think they're correctable, and the upside is there for him to be almost as good from that standpoint. Everything else, then I would say that Walker is actually a better blocker as well. It's just that neither of them. One, to me, Walker doesn't pick up complex blitz looks at this stage, but most running backs don't. He drops his head a little bit sometimes into contact rather than being able to deliver a punch, but he's still more advanced and being able to handle, inside blitzes better than Brees Hall does right now. Brees Hall, kind of like Jonathan Taylor, who I rated highly, was kind of an artful dodger sometimes.
Yeah.
And made it look good for the film, but so he didn't get yelled at too much. But that's those are the main differences that I would put with those players. So the reason that Hall wound up a little bit higher, even though I said more things for Walker, is that I weighed acceleration a little bit
Gotcha.
higher than most things, like we said in the beginning.
Understood. I think with Walker, I don't know if you agree or not, but like I that the vision is remarkable to me. Like to me, the way I explained it in my projection after I first saw Walker was his poise and his ability to just stay calm against penetration, and his ability to see beyond that first unblocked defender was so high level. I compared him to like being a character in the Matrix, to where everything looks like everything around him looks like it's going so at full speed, but he's moving in slow motion, and he knows and anticipates those oncoming defenders so well that when he does move, it's subtle, but he's able to elude those defenders like it was nothing. I haven't seen that in a while, in years, that type of elusiveness where his poise and his ability to see widescreen was like as close to elite. That's to me that was a big factor. And then I don't know about you, because a lot of people knock Walker because of lack of production in the receiving game, but I always say gotta look beyond the numbers, because that could just be a thing of usage. And to me, when I saw the few plays that Walker had as a receiver, I saw a very good receiver already. I thought he had good hands, good soft hands, and what they asked him to do, he did it at a high level in terms of transitioning. You have that transition from receiver to runner. I think he did that seamlessly. So I think he's underrated as a receiver, and that's what ultimately got him to overtake Hall in my rankings. Whereas a lot of evaluators out there, they look at the numbers and they think Hall isn't proven in the receiving game. I don't know if you saw the same as a receiver from Walker as I did.
100%, because I've been that's been kind of my hill to die on for years, because you can look at I gave Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, a number of backs like that good marks as receivers, even though the volume wasn't there, because there are certain things you can see. Most receivers aren't going to run dig routes like Austin Eckler. And you're not going to ask them to match up that way. So what you're looking for is good hand-eye coordination and not screwing up the routes that they are asked to run. And sometimes if they're asked to, occasionally they're asked to run routes where they try. Oh, Nick Chubb was another, and if you ever watched him against Cincinnati on that play that, where he goes up and pulls the ball away from a defender, it looks like an all-star play. I mean, he can catch the ball. It's just they got an opportunity for Kareem Hunt. They're going to use both of them. So, but you look at those players and you see enough of the hand-eye coordination moments that you just put the pen down and say, all right, he's not going to get the high-end score because I don't get to see everything, but most backs don't at this stage. So, yeah, for me, it's worked out for all those backs. I saw the same thing with Walker. He can catch. He uses the correct techniques with his hands, and he tracks the ball just fine. He doesn't leave his feet trying to jump for a ball that he shouldn't, and he understands which positions he should use his hands, and he can take some contact. So that's enough. It's enough. We'll see if a team wants to use him that way, because some teams like to. The reason they use guys certain ways isn't always, well, he can't catch or he can't do this. Sometimes it's that we don't want to run them into the ground.
Yeah,
and we want to, and then therefore we can use different skill sets to mix and match where their matchups are best.
Absolutely. Matt,
it was a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, honestly.
Before you hop off, tell everybody in the A2D family, all over 100,000 across all platforms, that they didn't know now they know where can they find you at. Football guys, and not just for draft guys, not just for draft fam. Your fantasy is getting bigger every year. More and more people are partaking, more and more stake is in the game. So let our family know, our fan base, where they can find you at, so we can keep up with you and keep track.
Sure. I'm a senior staff writer at footballguys.com, which is one of the oldest and largest fantasy sites available. I've been there since 2009, and I've been writing about fantasy football since 2003. So, I'm pretty well known for that. The rookie scouting portfolio has been around now in year 17. At mattwaldmanrsp.com, you get a pre-draft guide and then a post-draft guide where I give more of a fantasy take and give you cheat sheets with tiers and sweet spots of where you pick players. So if I tell you to take Nick Chubb over Saquon Barkley, I don't tell you to do that number one overall. I tell you can wait till the middle of the second round and get or Mahomes, or things like that. So I do all of that. I give you a newsletter that goes out throughout the year. I also do projections and rankings for dynasty leagues at a separate price package. But the RSP pre-draft, post-draft, and newsletter is available for $21.95. Most people tell you that it's worth 2 to 3 times that much, and I have editors always telling me to charge more, but it's a great deal. You'll get a lot. You'll learn a lot about football, and I also donate a percentage of that money every year, up to $5,000 to Darkness to Light, an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children, as well as how to teach people to handle the situation when it does unfortunately occur, so that they don't compound the damage and trauma that can happen to children when they do report it. And I've been giving since it's been about a decade now. I've been able to raise over $50,000 for that organization since 2012. So if you want to help out a good cause and you want to get some information that'll be helpful towards you, just your entertainment, or even just from an educational perspective, drop by mattwaldmanrsp.com.
Once again, Matt, thank you so much for taking this time out on a Thursday night to stay on with us this long. We're sorry we kept you. And then hopefully it's the first of many visits.
I hope so. You guys hit me up. Just let me know. Thank you so much for having me.
We definitely will. Definitely will. I think sometimes we have long periods, the long off season after the draft. So we'll definitely find a show for you to come back on so we can talk some fantasy and anything that comes to mind. But Thank you so much, Matt. It's been an honor. You dropped so much knowledge, and we greatly appreciate all the hard work you've been doing. Keep it up, and we'll see you again soon.
Appreciate it, Pete. Appreciate it, Chucks. Take it easy.
See you.
All right.
Wow.
That's hard to follow up. That's hard to follow up.
Yeah, that's
hard to follow.
I mean, fam, listen, we had a second and third quarter. We breezed. The interview took all of that up. Our second quarter is brought to you by BetUS. It's one of the oldest sports bets books around. You can see here. I know Chuck is about to put it on screen. Yeah, you literally can bet on it. You literally can bet on anything. I've been over market for over 25 years. Use the link in the ad right there for 125% sign-up bonus. Third quarter as well, Chucks, is brought to us by
SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com. Our doc, Paul Vidal, at Specialized Physical Therapy LLC, has 2 locations in Burlington and Cherry Hill. Make them yours. So we're going to go right to the no huddle, the fourth quarter, guys. And Pete, who's our sponsor for the fourth quarter?
Gleason's Bar, which is located at 6700 Mill Creek Avenue, Levittown, PA. Use promo code A2D for 10% off your order wherever you dine or take out or online. And for No Huddle, while we're usually unchoreographed or unscripted, since we didn't even put up the poll question yet because we got right into the interview, let's use the poll question tonight for our little No Huddle conversation. I think that may be good because we have people answering it. So really, the Eagles, we better off trading back in the first round and trading up, agree or disagree. If you were following with us when we had Matt Waldman on, Football Guys, RSP, go look at it. He does tie back everything. He kind of stated, he gave you that there's depth at a lot of positions in this draft. So if you're in that belief, I would say I agree in trading back in the first round. I don't necessarily, not a big fan of waiting to pay the roost, but if it makes sense, it makes sense, especially at the positions that you're looking for, whoever's highest on your board. I'm definitely not in the camp right now in this moment of trading up. So I'm all about right now. If it is feasible, like you said, trade back. Maybe you could get Alec Pierce at the tail in the first round, or maybe a Christian Watson, and you can get those other defensive players with the first 2 picks. That's where I'm at. What say you, Chucks?
I agree too. I think that while there are prospects that are very intriguing at the top, like toward the top, I mean, we've been hearing that Kyle Hamilton's going to fall. A lot of people love Sauce Gardner, and trust me, I would I would be, if the price is right and they trade up for those guys, I wouldn't be mad at all. I wouldn't be mad at all, especially for Kyle Hamilton.
Yep.
But if I were to, in a vacuum, just in general and broadly, just taking a look at it, especially after speaking to Matt Waldman and like how many great like wide receiver options there are throughout the draft. Like, and I told you this I think a week or two ago. We're not looking for the alpha. We're looking for someone to complete the room and to just be that other guy, that wide receiver 2 behind Devontae. And if that's the case, we don't need we don't need to go up and reach for one, right? So that having the extra picks with trading back, it's so enticing. Now, I mean, I'm not saying trade back from 18 all the way to the beginning of the second round. There obviously is like a threshold, but in general, I really like the depth of this draft. The more I look into other positions now and start studying other positions, it's a deep draft, and the money, the cream of the crop for where it's really sticks out, I think, is toward that end of the first, second, third round. There's so much talent. So I do agree to the poll. I think they're better off trading back than to be trading up. Now, the scenario that popped up and was the reason why I brought this poll question up was Peter Schrager from Good Morning Football brought up a scenario, and you tell me if you would do this. Would you? He said Eagles trade with the Texans. They would give a 15, 18, and Jalen Reagor for the Texans' number 3 pick. Would you do that?
But that has to be for Kyle Hamilton. Or, I mean, Kyle Hamilton, Thibodeau. I don't know if I'm doing that.
I don't know. See, the hesitancy right there, because you don't know. There's no one prospect where you're like, oh, it's for this guy.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I don't do that.
So if I hesitate, then no. You're right. I'm glad you pointed it out.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys that you could make the argument for, but it's not because they jump out at you. It's because you know what I mean? Like Hamilton could fall. A Dynasty 215 says it here. Hamilton is projected outside the top 5 now. Like in terms of talent, I don't have him outside top 5, and I'm pretty sure Dynasty would agree. But reports keep piling up. They're saying that because he's a safety, because he had a bad combine, his stock is falling, which I think is absurd. But I'm not going to trade up if I think Kyle Hamilton will fall. I'm not trading up because I don't believe the Eagles will take a quarterback. I'm not trading up for like Yvonne Thibodeau or one of those defensive ends if I believe that one can fall on me. So I think it's a matter of value and getting the value of your assets, and I think just staying put as opposed to trading up would be the best route for the Eagles. Jake Hensler says, agree with the poll. Jets, Giants, Texans have multiple picks before we pick. It's looking like the top DEs, CBs, and possible top 2 wide receivers will be off the board, so why not trade back and stock up? And he also follows up and saying, no way I trade 2 first for any of these top guys because we need way more than one great player.
That's true. Yep. That's true. A very advantageous spot.
Yep. And then Dynasty says he's Kyle Hamilton is his number 2 target.
Well, I mean, if the Eagles sign Honey Badger, then there's no need.
I'm still waiting for news about that.
I don't know. The longer it goes out, the less of the chances are. I mean, but our boy, Lewis Seen is still there, boy.
Yeah.
I don't think he's in the second round now, though. That's
for we'd have to get him with that 18th pick. But I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because for those of you who are listening, next week, which is the show before the NFL draft, we will be having our official NFL draft preview. We will be doing rankings for all positions. We will be giving our Eagles mock draft as well. So we want to save some of that for that show, but definitely tune in next week because we're going to have a lot of conversation. I'm sure we're going to be disagreeing on a lot of our rankings. So definitely tune in for that. Get yours prepped, your rankings, your big board, your Eagles mock, and let us know next week what you think. But Anthony Aide says the Eagles are in a good position with the picks we have now, especially at 15 and 18. Dynasty says if they sign Honey Badger, I'd trade both to move up and get Sauce. And then John Castiglione says, I think we should stay put and build this defense up. No first-round wide receiver.
I wouldn't. I'm definitely with you to build a defense up, but depends on what first-round wide receiver. I think they definitely take a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. I would have to venture to say, because at the end of the day, you still have to put up points. I mean, you don't have an Aaron Donald on this team that's going to get pissed off in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl and just take the game into his own hands. We don't have that guy right now. You know what I mean? And I mean, could Jordan Davis be that guy? Some seem to think so. Other people that I've listened to whose opinions I trust are not as high on Jordan Davis as we are.
They're not, yeah.
But very high on Perry and Winfrey, whose name has come up in our chats before. DT out of Oklahoma, who's right now projected in the second round. That could be a target. So I mean, it depends on how you want your flavor. It depends on where their board is at, who's high on their board. But we know what kind of GM we have. We know what he values, right? So being said, I mean, it's a very good opportunity that you'll be able to see a wide receiver within those first 2 rounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Jacob
I think
Hensler.
The first 2 rounds, definitely. First 2 rounds, I definitely think the chances are high that one of those picks in the first 2 rounds are going to be a wide receiver. It just depends on where. So, Jacob Hensler says if Hamilton or Gardner falls to a place where we can trade up without giving both ones, then yes, I do, but not if we have to give up both 15 and 18. And that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. If they fall out, let's say they fall out of the top 10, right? Say Hamilton falls at 11 or 12. They're sitting there. I don't know who picks at 11 or 12. But hypothetically, if he falls that far, but then you're worried about someone getting him at 13, 14, and you trade up from 15 and give up only a little bit extra and you can keep 18, then hell yeah, you trade up, go get Hamilton if he falls. And that's what I'm going to be looking for also. I'm really going to be looking for it if he starts falling. So I really like that. That's a really good point. Dynasty 215 says, I don't know. I really want to see them give Milton some play. And I think he will. I think you still – it's more so – I don't think you have to worry about Milton not getting play. I think you have to start thinking about long-term because Cox isn't going to be here past this season. So you need that depth. So you got Hargrave who's – I mean, how old is Hargrave? He's not young.
I think he's 28, 27, 28.
20s. So it's if you need interior depth. So you need someone on the interior side. And like we said last week, Pete, me and you agreed that there's no nose tackle. There's no someone, you don't have someone that can 2-gap. So having someone that can 2-gap was going to be very, very important for this defense and the flexibility going forward. So Jake says it's only rumors right now, but it sounds like Cowboys corner Calvin Joseph could be in some big trouble. Oh, interesting. So keep an eye on that. That's very, very – I mean, it's a Cowboys player. How surprised can we be that they're going to be in big trouble? But remember also, he had some issues coming out of that draft, some character concerns coming out of the draft. So that's another thing. If you guys still want to pitch in and give your thoughts on whether the Eagles should trade up, definitely let us know. Moving on from that, I wanted to just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to give a quick reaction to the interview because I personally I'm very pleased and impressed with how it went in terms of he gave so much knowledge, and I think that a lot of people, like, there are still people that aren't aware of his work, and I think it's very important that people really catch on to him because, like I said, nearly 20 years in the business. I've been following his work for so long. It's so, guys, I'm telling you, if you buy one draft guide, his is
two.
One
you got to
consider.
Two. So RSP
and the Beast.
And Dan, listen, I'm telling you, let y'all know now, Dane Brugler is the Beast. It's a beast for a reason.
Yes, yeah.
It's a novel.
These two, like they're the most comprehensive.
Yes.
Like guides you'll see. I'm telling you, like Dane's Beast draft guide has all the metrics, all of the combine measurements, all of the like everything for every single prospect at every single position, and gives a scouting report on each one. Matt Waldman's RSP, he only does quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So he only does those 4 positions. But man, I'm telling you, like with each player, there is so much detail. And there's, like he says, he explains a lot in his glossary. So before you even get to the player profiles, he breaks down a lot. Like there are charts. He'll go by and he'll say, okay, like he'll give charts on which running backs are the best at catching, which running backs are the best at vision, which running backs are the best at speed and acceleration. He'll give his sleepers, he'll give his overrated. There are so many sections within each position, and then each profile has so much detail, including when I tell you, it's incomprehensible how much information is in these guides. I'm not even exaggerating. The first time I bought the RSP, I was like, this is only $21. This is only $21. Whereas ESPN is charging you how much for an ESPN Plus subscription, and they're giving you
$7 a month.
Horrible content from Mel Kiper. Like telling you guys, go buy those 2 draft guides because they're absolutely worth it. But with Matt Waldman, he there were probably a bunch of other questions I could have asked him, but he did an amazing job. I'm very, very excited because I definitely want to get him on again sometime this summer to talk about post draft, what he thinks about certain prospects, and to help you guys also get ready for your fantasy football drafts, because he can drop some knowledge with that too. But he did a wonderful job. I love how he just kind of went with it, and what was supposed to be a half-hour segment turned into an hour and a half because he just he rolled with it. And big ups to him, shout out to him. But I don't know what your reaction was to the interview. We haven't had an interview here for a long time, so I don't know what you thought about having him on. Oh wait, you went away real quick. Sorry. I didn't see. He sent me a message. So he stepped away real quick. But yeah, guys, I'm telling you that definitely follow Matt Waldman. You'll learn a lot. He's the type of draft analyst and football analyst that a draft expert too, I'd say, that you'll learn a lot because he has so much wisdom, and he'll teach you he won't just give you takes on players and things like that. He's not just about takes. He's about peeling back the layers and finding reasoning behind those things and giving sound reason as to why this works this way. And he gives, I learned so much in terms of going in depth with evaluations and going in depth with players and finding out more than just what's on the surface. So definitely check out his work. Phenomenal. Draft talk. So I'm almost done, guys. If anyone that's wondering, I'm almost done all of my evaluations and breakdowns for the running backs. I've done 8 so far. On Tuesday, I released Dameon Pierce. On Thursday, I did Today I released Zaquandre White. Talk about like very raw but high upside prospect. If there's one guy on day 3 that the Eagles would be interested in taking a flyer on at the running back position, I pray it's Zaquandre White. I mean, this guy is everything you want from a physical standpoint. Physical and athletic profile is off the charts. Talking about guys who's 6'1", almost 220, and he's built, but he moves like he's LaShawn McCoy. And I'm not even kidding. But he's so raw. He's a converted linebacker, so he has no discipline. He doesn't know how to properly execute runs. His vision is bad because he's just undisciplined. So he's still learning. So he's raw from that aspect. But my breakdown, you'll see. Check it out. My video breakdown and evaluation is up on A2D socials. And then my last one will be on Tuesday, and that will be one Isaiah Pacheco. He's going to be my final video and breakdown. that'll be coming up. A lot of things that Matt Waldman said, I'm glad he did because we see a lot of similar things with Isaiah Pacheco. And trust me, I tried not to be biased because I'm from I went to Rutgers, so I tried my best not to be biased and looking from an objective scope. But I do think he's a sleeper. He's someone who could really turn out to outplay his draft stock where he's taken. So Don Don's on. He said Lewis C took a visit to the Lions today. No, no, God. Dynasty 215 says who the hell is Mel Kiper anyway? I don't know. I haven't listened to any of his takes in years. Don Don says I love the underrated players coming out of HBCU. Yes.
It's only the beginning, Don Don.
Only the beginning. It's only starting, man. They're on the rise. Deion, you've got Deion Sanders coaching up. You've got Hugh Jackson. You've got Eddie George. All those they're bringing HBCUs, to the forefront steadily and slowly. So yeah, I definitely agree. Jacob says, fellas, guesstimating who might be available when we pick. Who do you want us to take is if we stay put at 15, 18? Who do you guys want the most? I'm going to save it. I don't want to spoil it. I want to save it for next week. Jacob, tune in next week when we do our mock because I already have my guys in mind, but I want to save it for next week. So tune in next week. Please come back so that we can talk
Jake's
about it.
Jake's in the building most weeks. Jake's in the building.
Yeah, he is. Robert Gilchrist says, who's your number running back in the draft? Is it Hall? No, it's not Hall, but he missed it by just a hair. As I told Matt Waldman, his was Hall by a hair. Mine is Walker by a hair.
Yeah,
Walker. Since the moment I watched him, I've been enamored with him. He's probably my biggest draft crush this year, but I know that the Eagles are not going to take him. So I'm setting myself up for heartbreak. But yeah, he's my RB1. He's one of my favorite running backs I've seen in years. So yeah, I love Kenneth Walker. But Hall, like I said, Hall's a freaking stud. Yeah. He is a stud too. So even though he's RB2, it's not by much. I'm talking about it's like a hair. Like they're both the top tier. Both of them are the tier 1 running backs in this class.
Yeah.
Robert follows up, says Hall's a beast. I live in Iowa and watch Hall in person. Just a monster. He is. He's absolutely a monster. Absolutely a monster. He's so good.
Such a marketable name too. So
yeah, it is. It is a remarkable name. What else you got, Pete? We got a few more minutes before we head out.
I'm listening. I really, for the first time, Philly still can't win in Miami. Sixers Raptors starting Saturday. Nets are already in. We got so they're talking about NBA playoffs. I really don't have too much, bro. Like it's just been a good week. It's been a good week. Had a great show, great participation for the fam, great questions. Keep them coming in. I think everybody is excited. Probably be even more excited next week when we're 7 days away from the draft. A2D will be out in Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. Details soon to follow. But now I'm trying to think. Chrome is a lucky son of a bitch. I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah. 50-50 raffle.
Flyers raffle, 50-50 again. I think for like the second time this year. I won't say how much he won, but he's doing all right. Yeah, I'm Don Don brings up. He says I'm a Stranger Things fan. I don't know about Chuck's. I don't know if he watches. Stranger Things.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think it's June. Is it coming back?
I have to check again.
I'm not aware of any Stranger Things news, Don. I started watching. I will say this: I started watching the Lakers kind of mockumentary on HBO Max.
Oh yeah, the what's it called?
Building a Dynasty or Winning Dynasty or something like that. That's been really interesting watch, and they're coming out with a new series. I think it comes out the 25th. It's John Bernthal. I can't remember the name. I always call him Marlo from The Wire. They're coming out with a series called We Own the City. It's about the true story based off the corrupt cops in Baltimore. And it looks really good. Really good. So kind of deviating from that Marvel kind of supernatural thing that we always kind of discuss here in No Huddle.
Yeah.
That looks really good. But the Lakers thing is really good. I'm like 4 or 5 episodes in, and it's pretty good. Jerry Buss is he was a very eccentric character. I don't know how true this is, but it's good to see John C. Reilly playing in this capacity instead of putting his ball set on his balls on somebody's drums. Oh
God.
And Robert Gilchrist does ask us. He said, "Will we be sad if Rager gets traded?" I mean,
no.
I mean, he had a shot. Like, that's the thing. That's the prime example of what Chuck said and what we were talking about with Matt Waldman. If you didn't get a chance to catch the beginning of the show, it's like the first 90 minutes. Go back and listen to it. Put it on a pod, audio only. Definitely get a lot out of it, and you'll get some insight into how we view this. But everything is a projection. When Chuck was excited about Jalen Reagor, it was all about the projection of how he could fit in this offense if he was to hit everything that his projections were. He didn't hit those for whatever reason, right, wrong, or different. He did not hit those projections here.
He needs a fresh start.
I don't even think he hit his floor. He needs a fresh. He needs to change his scenery.
Yeah, he was right off. I'm not making excuses for Reagor,
right?
But he was already behind the 8 ball because he wasn't Justin Jefferson.
Yep.
So it was already going to be tough for him here. But he did.
And Devontae wasn't here already, so we drafted him in the fact that we thought we were getting number 1.
Yeah,
and so he's not that.
Yeah, and he's not that. So everything he did after that didn't help at all to make that better. I've come across. There are a ton of people that didn't want him, but were absolutely willing and wanting him to succeed. But when you do what you do on social media, when you go out and you don't really develop at all, to where there's even like flashes of consistency or anything to really hang your hat on to give hope, that's on you. That's on Reagor. And I really don't think he can succeed here. I don't think he's mentally tough enough for this fan base. And then that's not against the fans. We are a passionate city. We put football first. We are die-hard football fans, Eagles fans. And that kind of pressure from a city like ours, is too much for some players. So he needs a fresh start. He needs to go somewhere he can get rid of that stigma. And if he's got any hope of bringing that talent out again, he's got to do it. He's definitely going to have to do it elsewhere. I don't think it's here. So that's just how it is. Don says 2 wide receivers are coming off injury. Keep an eye on John Mechie and Justin Ross.
I'm disappointed. He spelled Mechie incorrectly. I'm just
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he was talking about. But Don, where were you the first 90 minutes?
I don't know. He had to be at work. Like all this, every question Don's asking us was all talked about.
Oh my God. Yeah, man. Matt Waldman, he mentioned Justin Ross as a day 3, his day 3 guy for the Eagles. So definitely, guys, if you're listening or if you missed that, I'm telling you, Pete said it. Definitely go back and listen to that 90 minutes interview. So much knowledge dropped. You'll learn a ton in just those 90 minutes. Robert Gilchrist says, "I'm with you. Talent is there, but never lived up to it." Don says he can see Reagor to the Patriots. I mean, they took Nelson. They took Nelson, so I mean, I guess I can.
They took Nelson. They traded for Parker.
Yep. So
yeah, I mean, Reagor. I can see Reagor as a very, very poor man's Brandon Cooks.
Very, very poor. Very, very poor. Very, very poor.
A D-grade Brandon Cooks.
Yep. All right, brother. Anything else before we call it a night?
Nah, man. Thank you. Thank you for putting the whole Matt Waldman thing together. And thank you, Matt Waldman, once again for coming on. Make sure you guys go check out footballguys.com. I'm going to check them out for fantasy. RSPs, I think it's at $21.95 if I'm not mistaken. Very well good. A very solid investment. If you want to It's not so much about rankings. It's not so much about stats, but you learn more about players and the traits, and you can kind of follow your teams and the brass that is there and the kind of mindset and the team that you're trying to build and put on the field. You can kind of, it just makes it easier. You can get more insight to the decision making of why these players in 2 weeks or names are going to be called in a way that they are, and how the teams can envision using them. And just keep rocking with us. Tomorrow we got Fan Friday. Saturday we got In This Very Ring, weekly roundup. Sunday, obviously, flagship. Monday, flight zone. I know, and then obviously we're at the point now. Every Sixers game is getting a live reaction, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
Every Sixers game is getting a live reaction. So
there's a show every single day for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, you can find us and anywhere you want to be at A2D Radio, A letter 2 number D letter radio. You know where that. If you don't know now, you know. Find us everywhere. You can't. There's not a social media platform that we are not on. We have turned over every rock. We're trying to reestablish something and break walls down, and you know what I mean. So rock with us, man. Enjoy this ride. It's a rocket. This is only the beginning. I know, Chuck, you're gonna go see Magnificent Beast, Fantastic Beast, Secrets of Dumbledore.
Yes, on Tuesday.
Sometime soon. Thank you, Rob. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, love. Thank you. Appreciate that. Honestly,
definitely appreciate it. We try. I mean, we just talk ball. We talk sports. We talk life when we feel the need and we see fit. But we really just talk ball, and we try to. And I've never met Matt Waldman before. I've never followed any of his work until Chuck's brought him to my attention. And my thoughts are in line just like his. We always look at through the same lens. And it's even here in the fan, when you guys look at things and you bring up players and we have different ratings, it's always been an open dialogue. It's never like you're wrong, you're stupid. That's what you believe. That's what you believe. I don't see that. Maybe it could be different. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like listen, for instance, I don't like Detroit pizza. I don't understand the point of it. Don keeps swearing about this shit. I don't get it. It makes no sense.
I prefer crabs over steak. I mean, what are you gonna do?
He's an alien, people. I don't know, but he's my boy.
I'm a weirdo. But we're all family here, and exactly like the reason why I love Matt Waldman and guys like him and Greg Cosell, two of the guys I look up the most when it comes to football evaluations, is because it's never about right or wrong in takes. It's about understanding football from a deeper level, and that's what we try to do here. We try to get each other to learn off of each other, understand football from a different level. I've learned a lot from Pete. I've learned a lot from people in this chat, just giving different feedback to making sure I check myself when I'm saying something that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So I love getting feedback from everyone. I love disagreements. As long as the disagreements can talk about it.
He really does.
Yeah. I do. But again, guys, next week is going to be another loaded show with Draft Talk. It's going to be our official draft preview show. Again, if you missed it earlier, we're going to be doing rankings for each position. Not like in-depth rankings. We're not going to go like 50 deep, but we're going to give like our top 5, top 10-ish, maybe for some positions. At each position, though, we're going to give our rankings. And then we're also going to do a fun Eagles mock just for shits and giggles. And then, obviously, if you have any questions, any topics, absolutely drop them in. But we better see you next week. Next week, the week before the draft, we've got so much to talk about, so much to cover. But until then, for myself, Chucks, and my boy Pete to my left, we appreciate you. Stay safe. God bless, guys. And we will see you next week. Same time, same place. Peace out.